Angela.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I am doing good. I have a little bit of a cold, but it's better than it was. I can finally breathe again, which is so nice. But
good for you. And, you know, I have such fond memories of meeting you and working with you on the anti-trapping initiative, and I just love that you're still active. It's not that I ever thought you wouldn't be, but it's just so important, and I love that you found this niche and that you just keep at it. It's so important.
I do. I try to incorporate, I don't know, I had these grandiose ideas at the University of Washington that we could put all of the major issues together, human rights and animal rights and environmental issues, because I thought, well, they all are related. So how do we get that out, and how can we get more cooperative support between different organizations? Because one of the things I was so disappointed with was that I would talk to animal rights people about human rights things, and they'd be like, oh, well, that's human rights. We really don't do that. I talk to human rights people about animal rights things, and they'd be like, well, that's not really something we're interested in. And I'm like, yeah, but it affects human rights because the poor migrant workers and the immigrant workers are so abused, or even if they're not, even if they're just poor white people or whatever, in factory farms, I mean, having to wear a diaper and not being allowed to take potty breaks and some of the other really serious conditions of the human rights violations, I was just like, can't we incorporate that so that people can look at it? I was so glad John Oliver covered the chicken farms yesterday. So I was like, well, see, this is what we need to do. So I was like, well, maybe we can do more of that. So that's kind of where I've tried to come at it, is like, can we, like, see that it's just not good for anyone to do these things?
That's right. Well, and it's interesting. I was having a conversation with somebody on Sunday whose focus wasn't animal rights, but essentially she said wherever there's an abuse of power, and essentially she said you could look at any form of exploitation on the planet, whether it's animals or whether it's children or whether it's laborers or women or what have you. Where there is exploitation, there is an abuse of power.
Right.
And it has that in common across the board. And yet people think that their issue is somehow separate than the other issues. But I agree with you. I think it is all connected, and which is why it's so frustrating when I'm out doing something animal-related and somebody says, well, don't you care about the children? Well, by doing this, I'm helping children. It may not look from the outset like I'm helping children, but if everybody adopted a plant-based diet and a compassionate attitude towards others, children would benefit.
Exactly.
So it's not like I'm excluding children. I just happen to be talking about whales or wolves or whatever it is on that day. But that response has always struck me as quite ignorant, because anybody who's fighting oppression or fighting an abuse of power is making the world a kinder place for all of us. That's actually a point that I wanted to bring up. I hadn't, it wasn't a direct response to any of the answers you it wasn't a direct answer to any of the questions you posed, but I do think it's sort of an overarching point that behooves us to pay attention to.
Right, definitely. And I've been working on this teen liberty stuff. I think you remember my little breakdown. I think it was after one of the circus protests where it was just I was freaking out. But I was abused in an institution. It was just a long time ago. When I was 15, I think I told you this back then, but I tried to kill myself because my stepfather was extremely abusive physically and sexually, and so I attempted suicide. And then my grandmother was like, well, because of the suicide attempt, you want to get psychiatric help because suicide's, like, really serious. So I was like, okay, well, it'd be better than being at home, because that's why I tried to commit suicide, because I didn't want to live in an abusive environment.
Right.
So I went to the psychiatric hospital, and then they said I was cured of my depression. And I'm like, well, I'm just in a safe environment. Of course, if I'm not being sexually and physically abused. And he was abusive to my dog, too, my little dog Lady at the time.
Oh, Angela, how heartbreaking.
Yeah, so he tried to kill her, and I jumped in front, and then I got really badly injured. So anyway, so that was a very upsetting time in my life. And then I was told, well, that I couldn't. It was like, you know, the bar is closing, but the it wasn't a bar closing, it was the hospital. And they were like, well, you're well, so we can't keep you here, but, so you kind of have to go back home. And I'm like, well, nobody reported what was going on to the authorities. The psychiatrist said that they knew it was an abusive home. They didn't report it to the authorities, which I felt they should have because they were mandated reporters, because I've learned all about that now, So as an adult advocate, I'm like, somebody should have reported to the authorities what had gone on, and he probably should have been in jail. So the fact that he wasn't and that none of that happened upset me. I just didn't feel like anybody was really wanting to advocate for me, and I didn't know how to advocate for myself because I was so young at the time. So I didn't know what to do. And they told me about this place in Utah, and I thought, I don't care. I'll go to some private school, because they told me it was a college preparatory boarding school that specifically would help kids who had been through trauma or abuse. And I thought, I don't care. Facts of life sounds good to me. I'll go to a private boarding school where I can just have some peace and focus on my studies,
Yep.
And that's not what happened. My grandmother took my dog. Don't worry, I wasn't going to leave Lady in that house. My grandmother was going to take my dog.
Good.
So I was like, that wasn't, I would never have abandoned my dogs to that house alone. So my grandmother did take my dogs. But nobody told me, and my grandmother took me in when I came back, but nobody told me that was an option, so I didn't know. So I was there for 2 months, and I could barely get any letters out. All my letters were screened. I was strip searched. I was horribly abused at the facility. They treated me like a criminal, and I was just a kid who had been abused and was trying to find a safe place to finish high school.
Angela, that is just devastating.
It was really bad. But since I've been doing this, animal rights was where I went, and then I was like, because I just can't stand the abuse of any innocent animal, child, anybody. So
Yes.
it was really upsetting for me. But I was like, I've got to do something about these institutions, because I didn't know about the program.
Are they still in existence?
They're still in existence. They are owned. They're now owned by UHS, which is Universal Health Services, Inc., which is been investigated by the U.S. DOJ, but they're too big to fail, I guess. They paid hundreds of millions in fines for fraud and abuse. And covering up abuse and covering up rapes at multiple of their facilities, and they're still continuing to do it, and it's ridiculous. So we're trying to expose that. But I've come into, some of these people who run these youth programs, they run ranches. There was this family that opened up a youth program in Utah. They had owned a horse ranch in Canada where all the horses were starved to death. And then they moved to Utah and opened a youth program where they were abusing kids. So it's very connected. So.
Oh, yes. And were they criminally charged for the horse abuse?
I'm not sure what happened. I know that they lost their ranch and that they moved to the States. I'm not sure if they escaped that because they were in Canada and they came to the U.S. They may have escaped those charges. But I know that there was a big to-do, and that was the parents were outraged because they were like, did you know that they owned a horse ranch? And I was like, no, I didn't, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Well, and that's such a good point, and I hit on this point with law enforcement all the time. Certainly animal abuse is worthy in and of itself in terms of acting upon, because it matters that animals are being victimized, and it's against the law to victimize animals in many ways.
Right.
But it also is important for law enforcement to understand that people who abuse animals typically don't stop there. They typically do go on to abuse members of their own kind. In a home where domestic violence is occurring, and you lived this, so you know this firsthand, often the animals are being abused and the children are being abused. Typically, they don't just say, well, I'll just abuse this child or I'll just abuse this dog. Typically, violence and abuse of power knows no bounds.
Right.
And many people, I think, are beginning to understand that and understand that direct connection between human violence and animal abuse, but it's still not something that's as well understood as it should be. And so even somebody who may not really care about animals, they should still care about animal abuse. And again, I would argue that people should care simply because animals are deserving.
Right.
But people who can't see that or for some reason are more human-focused, they should still care about animal abuse.
Exactly. Well, and how many, I mean, isn't that most serial killers get started? I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer was like saving animal body parts or some creepy weird thing before he started doing it to humans.
That's exactly right, and that is very common. And school shooters as well. Most school shooters have a history of violence toward animals in their past. If you dig deep enough, you're typically going to find that. Often they practice on animals. Animals are the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
So animals are just easiest to get their hands on, easiest to victimize. I mean, frogs and mice and even insects, they can do terrible things and nobody cares because people think those living beings are worthless. And then they start moving up the ladder, so to speak, and their crimes and then their victims, they start taking more risks, et cetera. But yes, you're exactly right. They typically start on those who are most vulnerable and accessible to them.
Yeah, so it is something I still care very much about. It's just I've been doing so much on children's rights. Okay, well, we have an animal issue with this child abuse situation, so I'm going to, like, make sure that everybody's on board.
Good for you.
Just to know what's going on. There's this one facility in Utah. We've had reports out of there from multiple kids who said that they would bring in, like, puppies or bunnies or kittens, and then they would let the kids get close to them for a couple of days or, like, maybe even a week or two, and then they would kill the animal in front of the kids as, like, part of, like, to show their dominance or something.
Unbelievable,
and it's
Angela.
Really sick. So.
Wow. And the authorities have been made aware of that?
Yes. I've done what I can, but these people are scared to come forward because these people terrify them. I mean, they're willing to do these horrible things. So these poor kids, they're scared to death, and they let us know. And I'm like, please go to the authorities with this. But they're like, no, because they'll come after me. So it's like, well, they come after me all the time, but I'm still here. I've been here for 10 years.
You know those are fear tactics. That's what, I mean, I'm not going to say somebody doesn't really intend upon harm, but very often just the threat of harm gets people to shut up, and that's what they're hoping for.
Right, but I'm like, well, you met the wrong person because I don't, it's like.
You're not easily intimidated.
Yeah, I've been through so much. It's like people get freaked out. I've been on buses or whatever where people were trying to intimidate me, and then they get freaked out because I really have like a no-fear attitude. But it's more like I've been through so much that I'm more like, you would probably be best to be careful because you don't know what's sitting underneath this soft, sweet exterior.
Good for you, Angela. I love it. Yep, well said.
I'm like, I'm one of the most kind, compassionate people you'll probably ever meet, but there's anger down here that's old and that's rotten and that's wanted to come out for a while. So please don't make it come out on you.
Good for you. Yep. Well, I mean, it's good that you know your limits and you know your triggers and you can speak out when you encounter those, and that's going to protect you. And it's really coming from a place of strength, like you've gotten strength based on your past experiences, and you're not going to let that happen again, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote down the questions that you had, so if you want to ask me, if you feel free, or I just wrote down what you posed, and maybe what we could do is I could go over what I've prepared, and then if you have additional questions you could ask. Does that sound good?
That sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, we know that you're Stephanie.
Right. So I'm Stephanie B., and I've been doing animal rights work in varying capacities for 20 years at this point, which is kind of shocking. I can't believe I'm that old. I've worked for multiple local and national animal rights groups, and I've really done everything from shelter work, literally cleaning kennels or medicating cats with a local organization, to writing content for animal protection websites, which was quite interesting, to investigating local abusers like a local puppy mill in the Arlington area. That was a big campaign of mine in the 90s. And then campaigning to stop local Canada goose kills by the USDA Wildlife Services program.
I remember that.
I'm sure you do. That was so much fun. And then, as you well know, because this is where we met, I've also worked both as a volunteer and as paid staff for the local initiatives, the animal rights initiatives. So in 1996, there was the bear baiting and hound hunting initiative, which made those practices illegal. And then in 2000, there was the anti-trapping initiative, which made body gripping trapping devices illegal as well. And both of those initiatives were successful, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
And then for the past 12 years, I've worked specifically doing cruelty investigations work for a national animal rights group. I started out as a caseworker, and I am presently a director of the Cruelty Investigations Department. And our division is national in scope, so we deal with things all over the country. We're actually international in scope, so occasionally we do get international cases in places like Mexico, certainly Canada, but sometimes more exotic locations than that. But I would say 90 to 95% of our work is within the U.S. And so that is where I devote most of my time. And it's interesting because cruelty investigations work can really run the gamut. It's got a wide breadth. It can be anything from somebody who has left a dog in a hot car on a hot day and the animal is in dire need or in distress, in danger of heat prostration, to horse abuse cases like the ranch case in Canada you referenced.
Yeah.
We deal with a lot of individuals who have animals in distress or who are medically in need, but the owners cannot afford medical care for them. So cruelty can have interesting faces. It isn't just the typical somebody beating their dog. That, of course, is cruelty, and we do investigate those regularly. But cruelty takes many forms.
Right, like neglect. Severe
exactly.
Neglect, yeah.
And sometimes simply a lack of funds or a lack of knowledge. In fact, I was discussing with a friend just a little bit ago because Washington State just passed a law that makes it easier for law enforcement to help animals who are trapped in hot cars when their owners are inside shopping and have ignorantly left their animals to bake in hot cars. And that is often just an issue of ignorance. You don't have people who are knowingly or intentionally leaving their animals to die of heat prostration. They're not thinking, and they're being thoughtless, so I don't ever excuse them. But at the same time, their intent is not to cause harm. But at the same time, their thoughtlessness and their ignorance results in harm and often results in animals who die in really, really bad ways.
Yeah.
So our division deals with a little bit of everything along those lines, and it's difficult work, certainly, but it's inspiring work because we do tangibly help animals, and it's work I really, as an activist, I am really drawn to the trenches. I think the trenches is where the suffering is happening and also where we are often able to make a big difference.
Right.
So for me, trench work is really what I like. And one of the points that I wanted to make that I think is really important for everybody to think about as activists is to really look at where your passions and your strengths lie. Some people are great schmoozers, and they do a really good job of, for example, lobbying, working with legislators, making political connections, going to fundraisers, talking publicly, etc. And if those are somebody's skills and those are their strengths and their passions, I encourage them to pursue it. I think we are most effective when we know ourselves and know our strengths and our weaknesses and know where we can really shine.
Yeah.
And animals need everything. They need people in the legislature. They need good vets. They need people who like doing what I like doing and people who are doing what you're doing. And I think people who really honor their strengths and know themselves can put themselves in a position where their strengths are being maximized.
Yeah.
I really bounced around quite a bit until I found this current position, and I've been in the division I work for now for 12 years, and I don't have any intention of leaving. I could see it ending up being 20 years because I'm so happy, and I think it is a good use of what I want to be doing and where my natural strengths lie, and I think that can make a big difference. I think sometimes as activists we think there's just one path, that you have to be the person who's chaining yourself to the fence post and getting arrested, even though that doesn't feel right for you, or you have to be the person doing public speaking even though you hate it.
Right.
There are just so many ways to give.
Research is so important, too. I mean, if you're like a little bookworm, we need research. We need all that data, all the scientific data showing that, animal experiments, there's junk science, all the data, all the corruption, the fraud. I remember when we were doing the house visits regarding Stevens. Oh, my gosh, it's been so long. Stevens something. Wasn't it Stevens? His last name was Stevens. He was from the Oregon
I'm not remembering that
Primate Research Center, and then he moved to Washington. Yeah, so he moved to the Primate Research Center, the UW Primate Research Center, but he was at the Oregon Primate Research Center, and he moved up here, I think. That was like years and years ago. But we had done house visits on the UW research lab people that one spring, and I was like, okay, well, you want to say that you're doing cures for these horrible diseases in Africa and that you're going to help millions of people, but will those people ever even see the cures that you claim to be working on? And he said no. And I was like, give me a break then. What are you doing?
That's right. That's exactly right. Yes. Well, and you're right that researchers are needed. So I always like to just encourage people who care and who have an activist bent to really explore where they feel they can most give, most naturally give. Where is it? Where can their strengths be maximized? And when we have an army of people who are all maximizing their unique strengths, we can really do a lot of good.
Definitely.
Well, I know one of your other questions, and I think it was a good one, and I really spent some time thinking about it. So you asked me what I thought were the most pressing animal welfare challenges today.
Yes.
And one of my answers won't surprise you, and one of my answers might surprise you. So I hope it's okay. I'm just going to speak my truth.
Go for it.
One of the things that I think about a lot that people don't often make the connection to animal rights is human overpopulation. And I know it's a bit of a controversial and unpopular subject even among animal rights activists and progressive people. But I really believe that human overpopulation is one of the major factors that is propelling our planet and its ecosystems and the animals who depend on this planet into a state of crisis.
Right.
And the exponentially growing number of humans, those numbers would be problematic in and of themselves, but it's compounded by the fact that the paradigm in which most humans are living, which is a human-centric paradigm and a paradigm that values humans over animals, makes it even worse. So you have a growing number of humans, exponentially growing, literally, and humans who are generally speaking holding themselves superior to and separate from other life forms.
Right.
Whenever I think about this, I often think of Chief Sealth's quote where he talks about humans being a part of the web of life. And those of us who love animals and have studied animals and have had relationships with animals, we know that we're animals too. We're just different animals.
Right.
And we're all part of the same web of life, and we all depend on the same things to live. We all need water, we all need food, we all need clean air, we all need exercise, these basic things. But humans, unfortunately, think of themselves, again, not you or I, but generally speaking, the human population and the paradigm in which the human population globally functions, because of that mindset, human domination is just wreaking total destruction.
Yeah.
And so even if, I often think about this, it wouldn't make it okay even if humans were engaging in exploitative practices, but it makes it that much worse that there are so many of us.
Right.
Because essentially animals cannot escape us. And we're having more and more of a destructive impact on our world, where essentially every reach on the planet, including our poles where the ice caps are melting, there's no place on the planet that is free from the human realm.
Yeah.
And so for me as an activist and as an animal rights activist, not bringing another child into the world was a very intentional decision for me and something that felt very in keeping with my animal rights stance. And of course, that's partially because of animal overpopulation, and personally for me, it's also because I wanted to expend my time and energies into being an activist, not raising a child. And so that is just a personal bent of mine.
Right.
But it's something I think about a lot, and I hope other activists will think about the same thing.
I hope so, too, because there are so many unwanted children right now, and so many children in foster care, and so many children who are waiting to be adopted who are like in dire straits or starving to death or having horrible medical needs that aren't being addressed. I mean, there's a lot of, it's just terrible. I'm like, overall, it's like, just try to take care of the people we already have without bringing in more people, and how selfish do we need to get where they have to look like us?
That
it's
is
like
so well said. Yes, that's exactly right. And it's interesting. I have a personal anecdote I'll share. So I am almost 46. I turn 46 next month, and I have a quote daughter who is 31. And I met her through a Big Sister Little Sister program when she was 9, and she's actually 32. She just turned 32. And she calls me mom, and I call her my daughter. And over the years, we've established a really beautiful kinship. And I can guarantee you, if I had had my own children, I would not have had the energy or inclination to become a mother to her.
Right.
And it's been a real gift to me, and it's been a real gift to her, and she has embraced many of the activist philosophies that you and I share. And these are philosophies that are very new to her in terms of her community. And she's now introducing these values, plant-based diet and being kind to animals, into a community where that's not really valued a lot. And so I think the ripple effect, as you said, of meeting the needs of the people who are here now, and as opposed to just creating more mouths to feed, I think it's just an important aspect for me of activism that is never lost on me. And I often feel that one of the two best intentional decisions I've made as an activist were, number one, not to bear children, and number two, to adopt a vegan diet. And that's what I'll talk about next.
Okay.
And so I would say that if I had to pick a number two in terms of the most pressing animal welfare challenge today, next to human overpopulation, it would be animal agriculture. And I often look at animal agriculture. I like bringing a historical perspective to things. I often think about where the roots of our modern-day agriculture system began. And if you look at the agricultural revolution 10,000 years ago, it's really when humans began to first dominate animals in nature. Of course, at that point, people were hunting, so it wasn't like animals were free from humans even then.
Well, humans aren't free from animals either. There's people get eaten.
Exactly. Well said. And so, there were these conflicts in existence already.
And sometimes people eating people, which is really weird.
It's true, right? And human sacrifice and all of those things. So, there has never been a time on the planet where things were just perfect. But the agricultural revolution really laid the groundwork for what we see today, and that is institutionalized exploitation. And combined with, in my opinion, a total disconnect about the ramifications of that. So sort of, pardon my language, but the environment be damned if people justify these practices, confining tens of thousands of animals, on a 1 mile square lot, and having their feces pile up in these toxic lagoons, which is what our animal farms look like today. People justify this, and it's been institutionalized, so the government subsidizes it.
Right. Chris Christie and his whole, it was a partisan issue or something. What was that? Was it pig crates? I was like, are you nuts?
I know, exactly. And I don't know if he just had the pig farmers in his back pocket and wanted that money. That's probably what it was. It's odd because they were primarily in another state, so who knows what that was about. He probably just wanted big industry in his back pocket, essentially. And when I think about modern-day farms, it's so horrifying. They are a paradigm of doom. There's nothing good, there's nothing redeeming, and the interesting thing is nobody benefits. The only body who benefits from this paradigm of doom are the CEOs in these corporations who are making millions and billions. But nobody else benefits. Certainly the animals suffering in these systems don't benefit. The environment is degraded and destroyed. Our waterways are destroyed. Our groundwater is destroyed. The air is toxified. The water, of course, is impure because the water's been polluted, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't benefit human health. We know from studies are very clear that animal products do not benefit humans. And it's from an environmental perspective, you could say, well, this issue just from an environmental perspective merits our attention.
Right.
But then you look at the numbers of animals we're talking about, and I know you know this, Angela.
Yeah.
But more than 56 billion farmed animals, and yes, that's billion, are killed for food every single year. And more than 3,000 animals die in slaughterhouses around the world every second. Every second. Just as we're talking, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000 animals are dying.
Right.
And these figures are so impossible to wrap one's mind around. I think it has almost a numbing effect that when you can't truly conceptualize something, it almost becomes it almost anesthetizes you and paralyzes you. And what it does is it makes people think, well, what good could I do in the face of that? If 3,000 animals died in just one moment, what can I do? And I think that is where we both lose our power or can find our power. I often, when I think about these numbers and think about this institutionalized cruelty that dates back to tens of thousands of years ago, I want to give in to despair. But what I know is that, and I think it's one of the beautiful things as activists we can do around this very issue, is we can take charge by simply adopting a plant-based diet. We can save 95 animals a year, approximately, and of course thousands of animals over the course of a lifetime. We take a stand for the planet. We take a stand for the animals so that animals are not dying because of us. And it's really as simple as abstaining from the products that cause harm and then supporting products that are beneficial to others. So, for example, when I'm choosing a head of kale at the grocery store instead of a block of cheese to get my calcium and nutrients, I'm not supporting a dairy cow who's suffering miserably with her calf.
Right.
And I'm not supporting the rivers being polluted, and I'm not clogging my own arteries and giving myself heart disease, which is going to be a burden on the taxpayers.
Right.
I'm taking a stand for all of those things, against those things, and I'm making my own body healthy. I'm helping the environment, and I'm helping animals, and it's that simple. And I think by consuming a diet that is compassionate and plant-based and embracing a philosophy of no harm on every level, we can have a very dramatic impact over our lifetime. And for me, I call it vegan, and really the definition of vegan is no animal products. But I also like to refer to it as a compassionate diet. So for me, vegan includes abstaining from palm oil, because right now palm oil plantations are deforesting our tropical forests so that they can plant palm to put in our desserts. And this is having a detrimental impact on species like orangutans, for example, and tropical birds. And so for me, I'm vegan and I don't eat animal products, but there are things that I do in addition to that in keeping with my desire to do no harm. One of those things was not to bring a child into the world.
Right.
Another thing is to abstain from palm products. And so I think really for me it's encouraging people to be mindful and conscious about what are you buying, what are you doing, where are you going, how are you spending your energy, is it for a healing purpose, who is it helping, and just being conscious of that, because as humans, for some reason, we seem capable of kind of disconnecting from the results of our choices and not paying attention to those things. But I think when we are paying attention, we can really be healers on this planet.
Definitely.
It's true. It's so true. Well, let me touch on the next question you asked, and actually, I think that I can cover it in a pretty short way. But you asked me what, in my opinion, are the 5 major problems that need to be solved in terms of animal rights challenges and what people can do to help.
Right.
And you and I touched on this a little bit, but all animal exploitation stems from the human construct or belief that we have the right, because we have the might, to exploit animals for any conceivable purpose. And people have bought into this. And one of the things I love about PETA's mission, and I think they put it so nicely when they say that animals are not here for us to eat, wear, experiment on, use for entertainment, or abuse in any way. And I would say that those are the 5 rules to live by. If somebody is living by those rules, they are benefiting animals, and they are ensuring that they are not exploiting animals, because those rather nicely define, in my opinion, the 5 major problems that face animals in our world today.
Right.
They are being eaten, their bodies are being torn apart for clothing, whether it's leather or fur. They're being experimented on a mass scale. They're being used for entertainment, be it TV ads or circuses or marine parks or zoos.
Or fighting, which is disgusting.
Exactly.
I mean, it's all
fighting.
disgusting, but...
That's right. Horse racing, I mean, the list goes on. Or abused in any way, and that can run the gamut. I mean, whether it's animals languishing on the end of a chain, or animals in hot cars, or people who are beating animals, or, you know, as you described your history with an abusive individual who was harming your animal, probably in part to harm you. These are the kinds of things we see in our world every day. And if somebody is challenging that status quo and embracing instead a sphere of compassion that extends to all of life, then we are inspired, of course, with that philosophy to take pains so that we're not eating animals, and we're not wearing animals, and we're not experimenting on animals or supporting that. And we're abstaining from entertainment that involves the use of animals, and we're not abusing animals in any way. And that can sound trite, like, well, yeah, that sounds great, but really, what good does it do? But what you and I both know is that every time we abstain from supporting that institutionalized exploitation, we are taking a stand against it. And if thousands of people did this, it would be a very different world.
Right.
And it can be so easy, I think, as activists, and I know this full well, and I'm sure you do too, with your history and your compassionate heart, that you think about the mountain of suffering. I mean, again, you just think about the numbers of animals who are caught in that system of suffering, and it can just make you feel so powerless and defeated. And I have my moments where I feel that way. But again, and I'm repeating myself a little bit, when we are living consciously and we recognize that every action we take has a ripple effect, it's interesting. Somebody I knew around the time when you and I were working on the anti-trapping initiative gave me a little paperweight, and it has a quote on the top, and it says, "No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted." And I have that on my desk. And it's just kind of a compass for me, because sometimes we don't have any sense of how powerful those small acts of kindness are.
Right.
And you think about the pig on a factory farm who gets a reprieve because somebody is choosing not to eat pepperoni that day. Or, you know, the fox on the fur farm, or the rabbit in the medical lab, or the elephant at the circus, or the dog on the chain. Each one of those animals technically could be spared from that if people like you and I and the many other compassionate people we know simply chose to live consciously.
Right.
And it's really that simple. And so I would say that those are the 5 problems to tackle, and it's pretty simple in terms of what we do to help. We just simply abstain from supporting the exploitation of animals in any of those fashions. And we can take that as far as we want to. I mean, whether it's choosing to gently and carefully remove a bee from our home instead of just smashing him underfoot, which typically isn't necessary.
Right, but dogs, man, my dogs, Rose was a bug squasher. I couldn't, there was no way. Once she had it in her sights, it was paw down, smash.
This is true. We can't always impart that philosophy to our animal companions, and I think about this a lot because I have 2 cats, and they are obligate carnivores, which I struggle with. But it's who they are biologically. I may choose in the future not to have cats because of this, but I made a lifetime commitment to them, and they're elderly. But yes, in terms of what I can do and the impact I can make, I believe very much that adopting that compassionate outlook can make a big difference. Well, do you have any other questions for me? I think I covered everything I came prepared with, and I hope I answered what you were hoping I would.
Oh, definitely. No, I think you did great, and I agree wholeheartedly with your perspective of the 5 things people should do and could do.
And it requires vigilance because we live in a world where the instinct or the standard route is usually just destruction. So whether it's pesticides or what people eat or how people function, it's interesting that the default isn't life-sustaining, and so we have to be really vigilant about making sure that we are supporting things that are life-sustaining, and you're doing that, and good for you.
And I will keep doing that.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt, and I love you for it. Good for you, Angela.
Thank you. You're one of my biggest inspirations. I was crying the other day talking to my mom about you because you are always so kind. And, I know you do get angry, but I've never seen you, get angry where you've taken it out on someone, even when they deserved it, even when we're in, the middle of, you've always been able to put your best foot forward and be so compassionate and kind, even in the face of some extraordinary adversity. And I've been I need to be more like Stephanie. Whenever I feel myself, not being as kind or, responding to adversity with more anger than, in a calm way or in a more, I don't know.
Well, I think the adversity you've come through, my good friend, is quite admirable, and I certainly have my moments. So we all struggle to find a way to be peaceful in this world and to make sure that we're kind. And I'm no different than you. I definitely have my struggles there, but I also appreciate the kind words. That means a lot to me.
My idea of you then will always be my inspiration for doing better.
You're so sweet. Perfect, Angela. Perfectly stated. Let me know, and I hope our paths cross in person in the future, but just stay in touch. I love that we've stayed in touch ever since the initiative. It was a pleasure, Angela, really, and thank you for all you do and for never giving up the fight.
Thank you.